The myth of weak humanity. The Galactic Union had ruled the stars for thousands of years. It was the greatest alliance of alien civilizations, with hundreds of worlds under its control. Every species in the Union had its place. Some were warriors, some were scholars, and some were builders. But there was one species that the Union never took seriously: humans. To the Galactic Union, humans were nothing more than a weak and primitive species from a small blue planet called Earth. The official records of the Union described humans as fragile, slow, and unremarkable. Their history was full of wars and struggles, but the Union believed those stories were nothing more than myths. They think too highly of themselves. The Supreme Chancellor of the Union often said, "Their legends of strength and bravery are just fairy tales. They will never be a threat to us." Most Union citizens agreed. When humans first discovered faster-than-light travel, the Union barely noticed. When Earth sent ambassadors to join the interstellar community, they were treated with polite indifference. The Union had seen hundreds of species rise to the stars, and most of them quickly accepted their place under Union rule. The humans would be no different. Or so they thought. A galaxy that laughed at humanity. In the grand halls of the Galactic Senate, the leaders of the most powerful alien civilizations gathered. The Senate chamber was a massive structure built into an artificial moon, with towering pillars and glowing banners representing each member world. On this day, they were discussing a ridiculous matter: Earth's first military fleet. A holographic projection showed Earth's newly built warships. They were sleek, black, and heavily armed. But to the Union, they were nothing impressive. The Supreme Chancellor, a towering reptilian being with golden scales, chuckled. "So, the humans have built a fleet. How amusing." The other senators laughed. A feline-like ambassador waved a paw dismissively. "They are children playing with fire. If they dare to challenge the Union, they will be crushed." The laughter continued. "They think their history of war makes them strong," another senator added. "But they know nothing of true war." For centuries, the Union had maintained peace by eliminating any potential threats before they grew too large. They had fought countless wars against rebellious species, crushing their fleets with ease. Their technology was superior, their fleets were massive, and their armies were unmatched. What could a small species like humanity possibly do? The warning that was ignored. Not everyone in the Senate was so sure. In the shadows of the Grand Chamber, a lone figure watched the proceedings in silence. Admiral Keln, one of the most experienced military leaders in the Union, had studied human history in detail. Unlike the others, he did not laugh. He had read about Earth's wars, their endless conflicts, and their stubborn refusal to surrender. He had seen the reports of how humans pushed through impossible conditions, surviving against all odds. Their adaptability, their resilience, it was unlike anything he had seen before. And now, they had a fleet. "They are not like the others," Keln muttered under his breath. When the laughter died down, he finally spoke. "We should not underestimate them." The Senate chamber turned silent for a moment. Then, another wave of laughter erupted. The Supreme Chancellor grinned. "Admiral, you worry too much. If the humans dare to challenge us, we will remind them of their place." Keln clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He knew the truth. The Union had made a mistake. The first signs of war. Months passed. Reports came in. Earth's fleet was moving. They were not attacking yet, but they were expanding their influence, building alliances and securing resources. Human warships were seen patrolling the borders of Union space. Still, the Union refused to take them seriously. "They are posturing," the Senate declared. "A show of force. Nothing more." Then, a Union outpost went silent. At first, officials thought it was a technical failure, but when a patrol ship was sent to investigate, all they found was debris. The entire station had been wiped out. No distress call, no warning, just destruction. A deep unease spread through the Union ranks. More outposts fell. More ships disappeared. It was no longer a joke. The moment everything changed. Then, it happened. A full Union battle fleet was sent to deal with the human problem. It was a fleet of 50 warships, the pride of the Galactic Union. It had destroyed entire civilizations before. They expected an easy battle. They never returned. The last transmission from the fleet was a garbled distress signal. Screams, explosions, static, and then silence. The Galactic Union could no longer ignore the truth. The stories of human might were not myths. The humans were not weak. They were warriors, and now they were coming. The first encounter. The Galactic Union had ruled with absolute power for centuries. No species had ever truly challenged them. Every rebellion was crushed. Every war was won before it even began. But now something was different. A new enemy had appeared, an enemy they had laughed at, dismissed as weak. Humans. And the Union was about to learn just how wrong they had been. A fleet in the darkness. Admiral Kelm stood on the bridge of his warship, staring at the vast emptiness of space. The Union's fleet was assembled, a force of 50 powerful warships, their hulls gleaming under the distant starlight. They had been sent to make an example of Earth, to remind the humans of their place. But something felt off. There had been no response from the human fleet. No messages, no demands, no threats. Just silence. Kelm didn't like it. Any signs of them? He asked, his voice steady. Nothing, Admiral, his sensor officer replied. Scanners show empty space. No ships, no signals. Kelm frowned. It didn't make sense. The humans should be here. Their fleet was reported in this sector just days ago. Then, without warning, the lights on the bridge flickered. The screens glitched. A deep hum filled the air. And suddenly, they appeared. The ghost ships. One by one, massive human warships emerged from the void, their black hulls reflecting nothing, as if they were shadows come to life. They didn't arrive through normal, faster-than-light travel. There was no distortion, no energy surge. It was as if they had been there all along, hidden in the darkness, waiting. Kelm's heart pounded. How did they get so close? One of his officers shouted. It's impossible, another cried. But there they were, hundreds of human ships, surrounding the Union's mighty fleet like silent hunters. Then the first shot was fired. A single blue-white beam cut through the void, striking the Union battleship. The shields barely flickered before the ship exploded into a ball of fire. The bridge fell into chaos. They took out the Iron Fang in one shot. An officer yelled. That's not possible. Our shields should have. Another explosion. Then another. Panic spread. The Union fleet tried to return fire, but something was wrong. Their targeting systems were failing. The enemy ships moved in ways that shouldn't be possible. Quick turns, precise dodges, unnatural acceleration. The humans weren't fighting like any enemy before them. They were hunting. The whisper of death. A deep voice echoed across every Union ship. It was a transmission. It came from the human fleet. Your mistake was thinking we were weak. Kelm felt a chill crawl down his spine. The voice was calm, steady, without fear, without hesitation. It was the voice of a predator speaking to its prey. This is your only warning. The human commander continued. Leave now, or be erased from history. Kelm turned to his crew. Open a channel to command. We need reinforcements now. But the communications officer shook his head. We're jammed, Admiral. His words were cut off as the main screen flashed. A Union dreadnought, the largest, most powerful warship in the fleet, was ripped in half by a barrage of kinetic rounds. No energy weapons, no fancy technology. Just raw, unstoppable force. This was no battle. It was a slaughter. The fall of the Union's elite fleet. One by one, the mighty warships of the Galactic Union were destroyed. Some exploded instantly. Others drifted, crippled and burning. Few even had time to return fire. Kelm clenched his fists. He had underestimated them. They all had. The humans fought with terrifying precision. They didn't waste shots. They didn't panic. They executed. And now, the once invincible fleet of the Union was being torn apart. Keln knew he had one last choice: retreat or die. He pressed a button on his console, activating an emergency jump sequence. All surviving ships, fall back. Now. The few remaining warships turned and fled. Some made it. Many didn't. As Keln's ship jumped away, he saw the battlefield one last time. Human warships hovered among the wreckage, untouched, undefeated. They had done the impossible. They had destroyed the Union's most powerful fleet without losing a single ship. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The wrath of humanity. The Galactic Union had ruled for centuries with an iron grip. Every enemy that stood against them had been crushed, every rebellion silenced before it could grow. They believed they were invincible. But now, their most powerful fleet was gone, wiped out in a battle that should have been an easy victory. The humans had proven them wrong. And this was just the beginning. The echo of defeat. In the heart of the Galactic Union's command center, the Supreme Chancellor stood frozen. His golden scales, once gleaming with pride, now seemed dull under the cold lights of the war room. A transmission played over and over on the main screen. The last message from Admiral Keln's fleet before their destruction. Static, screams, explosions, and then nothing. Silence filled the chamber as Union officials watched in disbelief. The greatest fleet in the history of the Union had been destroyed in mere minutes. This cannot be real, one of the high generals muttered. They ambushed us, another shouted. They must have had help. No species could do this alone. The Chancellor's claws dug into the metal railing. He had ignored the warnings. He had laughed at the idea of humans being a threat. Now, the joke was on him. Where is the human fleet now? He demanded. A nervous officer hesitated before speaking. Unknown, Supreme Chancellor. They disappeared after the battle. No signals, no transmissions. It was as if they had vanished into the void. And that made them even more dangerous. Humanity strikes again. The Galactic Union scrambled to recover. Fleets were repositioned, defense grids were activated, and emergency meetings were held in the Senate. They thought they had time. They were wrong. 2 days after the first battle, another Union world fell silent. Then another. Entire planets, gone. Not through planetary bombardment, not through drawn-out sieges. The humans were precise, surgical. They infiltrated key systems, shut down power grids, disabled defenses, and struck without warning. By the time the Union understood what was happening, it was too late. How are they moving so fast? A panicked senator asked. No one knows, an intelligence officer admitted. They don't follow any known battle tactics. They strike, disappear, and strike again before we can react. The Supreme Chancellor's eyes narrowed. They are using fear as a weapon, and it was working. A message from the void. Then, a message arrived. A simple transmission. No video, just a voice. It was the same human commander who had spoken before. You called our strength a myth. You thought we were weak. Now, you see the truth. The Union leaders listened in silence. We do not seek conquest, the voice continued, but we will not be your cattle. We will not kneel. And we will never forget what you have done to others. A pause. Your time is over. Surrender or be erased. Then the transmission ended. A deep unease spread through the war room. The Supreme Chancellor turned to his generals. Prepare for total war. We end this now. But deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. For the first time in his long rule, he was afraid. And in the darkness of space, the human fleet was already moving again, unstoppable, relentless, and ready to finish what they started. Humanity's message to the galaxy. The Galactic Union had always believed in its own superiority. Its rule was absolute. Its fleets were unstoppable. Its enemies were nothing more than footnotes in history. But now, the footnote had become the storm, and the storm was tearing through them with relentless fury. The fall of a fortress world. Vax Prime was the jewel of the Union's military might, a planet-sized fortress. Its defenses were unmatched, layered energy shields, planetary railguns, and an armada of battle stations orbiting its skies. It had never fallen. It was considered impenetrable. Until now. The attack came without warning. One moment, the fortress world stood proud. The next, it was in flames. Union warships scrambled to respond, but the humans had already disabled the orbital defense grid. The planetary railguns, so feared across the stars, sat useless, hacked and silenced. Then came the human dropships. They didn't land in open battlefields. They didn't follow traditional tactics. They landed inside cities, military bases, communication hubs. They didn't come to fight a war. They came to end it. The panic spreads. The Galactic Union's War Council gathered in emergency session. The chamber, once a place of confidence and control, was now filled with fear. Reports came in too fast to process. The fleet at Zevers 9, wiped out. The shipyards of Haldren, destroyed. Entire planets surrendering without a fight. Unheard of, but happening. Their strategy is unlike anything we've faced before, a panicked general shouted. They're not trying to conquer. They're targeting our ability to resist. They're cutting off our arms and legs before we can even swing back. Another whispered. The Supreme Chancellor stood in the center, silent. For the first time in his reign, he had no answers. Then the lights in the chamber flickered. Screens glitched. A deep hum filled the air. And a voice, cold, precise, and undeniably human, echoed across the room. Humanity speaks. Your time is over. Every screen in the war chamber now displayed a single image, a fleet of black warships, hovering in space, untouched and unchallenged. We warned you, the voice continued. We gave you a choice, but you refused to listen. The Supreme Chancellor clenched his fists. You think you can dictate terms to us. A pause. Then, laughter. Not mocking, not cruel, just knowing. You misunderstand, the human voice replied. We are not asking for terms. Then the screens changed again. A live feed from Vax Prime. A city in flames, Union forces laying down their weapons. Human soldiers moving through the streets, unchallenged. The Supreme Chancellor's blood ran cold. The fortress world, the strongest world in the Union, was gone. The old order is finished, the voice declared. The galaxy will remember this day, the day the myths became reality. Then the transmission cut off. For a long moment, no one spoke. And then, finally, Supreme Chancellor, one of the generals said, voice shaking. What? He snapped. The general swallowed hard. What do we do now? The Chancellor had no answer. And in the darkness of space, the human fleet moved forward once more. This was not just a war. This was judgment, the last stand. The Galactic Union had ruled for millennia, believing themselves to be the eternal masters of the stars. They had crushed rebellions, silenced uprisings, and rewritten history to make their power seem absolute. But history was being rewritten again. And this time, it was human hands holding the pen. The fortress that must not fall, Exervon, the beating heart of the Galactic Union. A world covered in steel and fire, its cities built like fortresses, its sky filled with thousands of warships. If the Union had any hope left, it was here. The Supreme Chancellor stood on the balcony of his war palace, staring at the massive holographic projection before him. The final defensive fleet, what remained of the once mighty Union Navy, was assembling in orbit. Hundreds of warships, the last hope of a dying empire. This is where we hold them, the Supreme Chancellor said, his voice tight with fear. The humans will not break through. They cannot break through. But deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. Because the enemy was already here. The humans arrive. Sensors screamed warnings. Defensive platforms powered up. The fleet locked weapons, waiting. Then, the darkness of space shifted. One by one, black warships emerged from the void. No flashing lights, no energy surges, just silence. The human fleet did not come with fanfare. It came like a shadow falling over a doomed world. How many ships? The Supreme Chancellor demanded. A nervous officer checked the readings. His skin paled. Too many, he whispered. Far too many. The war room fell silent. Because in that moment, they all understood. This was not a battle. This was a reckoning. The first strike. The Union fleet opened fire. Energy beams and missile swarms filled the void, streaking toward the human fleet, the combined might of a desperate empire, unleashed in one final stand. But the humans were ready. Their warships twisted through the barrage like ghosts, dodging and weaving with impossible precision. Their technology was beyond anything the Union had ever faced. Then the humans fired back. It was not a chaotic battle. There was no desperate scrambling. It was execution. A single railgun round from a human dreadnought punched through 5 Union warships in a row. A barrage of kinetic slugs ripped apart the flagship of the Union fleet in seconds. A stealth squadron of human fighters disabled the defense grid before the Union even knew they were there. Panic spread. "This isn't a war," one of the Supreme Chancellor's aides whispered. "This is extermination." The collapse. The Union fleet tried to retreat. They never made it. The human fleet moved with purpose, with strategy, with terrifying efficiency. They didn't waste ammunition. Every shot mattered. Every attack was calculated. Within an hour, the last Union warship exploded in a silent ball of fire. The Supreme Chancellor watched it happen, his claws trembling. He had always believed in the power of the Union. He had always believed that no species could stand against them. Now, he stood in a silent war room, watching the fleet he had trusted burn. A deep voice echoed across the chamber. The humans had sent another transmission. "Your fleet is gone." The Supreme Chancellor closed his eyes. He already knew what came next. "Now we are coming for you." The fall of the Galactic Union. The Supreme Chancellor had never known fear. He had ruled the Galactic Union for over a century, watching species rise and fall, their histories erased, their civilizations absorbed into the grand machine of the Union. But now, as he stood in his war chamber, staring at the burning wreckage of his last fleet, he finally understood fear. Because the humans were coming. And there was nothing left to stop them. The sky burns. Exervan's night sky turned to fire. Human warships descended through the atmosphere, breaking through the last remnants of the Union's planetary defenses like they were made of paper. Anti-air batteries opened fire. Shield generators struggled to hold. The Union's last soldiers scrambled to their stations. But it didn't matter. The human fleet was not here to fight a battle. They were here to end a war. A throne without power. The Supreme Chancellor watched the chaos unfold on the massive holographic screen in his chamber. His capital was falling. Entire districts were in flames. The planetary defense grid had gone dark. Reports of mass surrenders flooded in. Even his most loyal generals, those who had sworn to die for the Union, stood silent, defeated. "This isn't possible," one of them muttered. The Chancellor turned to his war council. "Deploy the elite guard. We still have forces in the palace." "We." "Sir." A trembling aide interrupted. His skin was pale, his voice shaking. "The palace shields are down." The Supreme Chancellor froze. Then, for the first time in the history of the Galactic Union, the doors of the High War Chamber were forced open. The face of humanity. The room fell into dead silence. The humans had arrived. They did not storm in with reckless fury. They did not shout or gloat. They simply walked in. A group of armored soldiers, their black visors reflecting the golden glow of the chamber. And at their center, a single figure, tall, calm, unshaken. The Supreme Chancellor had seen countless warriors in his lifetime. He had watched entire species kneel before him. But this human, this was not a soldier. This was a conqueror. The human commander stepped forward. No fear, no hesitation. "You lost," he said, his voice steady. The Supreme Chancellor swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. His claws trembled against his robe. He had never been in this position before. "What?" He forced the words out. "What do you want?" No mercy, no conquest, only justice. For a long moment, the human commander said nothing. Then he spoke. "Not revenge," he said. "Not your empire." The Supreme Chancellor's breath hitched. He had expected demands for power, for resources, for submission. But what came next shook him to his core. "We want justice," the human said. "For every world you destroyed, for every species you silenced, for every civilization you erased." The Supreme Chancellor opened his mouth to speak, but the human cut him off. "And justice means the Union ends. Now." Silence. The Supreme Chancellor looked at the faces around him. His advisors, his generals, none of them spoke. None of them argued. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. The Galactic Union was already dead. The fall. Across the capital, Union banners were ripped from their buildings. Across the galaxy, Union warlords surrendered without a fight. The empire that had ruled the stars for millennia collapsed in a single night. The Supreme Chancellor fell to his knees. This cannot be how it ends," he whispered. The human commander tilted his head slightly. "It ended the moment you thought we were weak." Then he turned to his soldiers. "It's over." And just like that, the Galactic Union ceased to exist. A new galactic era. The Galactic Union was no more. Its fleets destroyed. Its rulers defeated. Its empire crumbled. For the first time in millennia, the stars belonged to no one. And the galaxy held its breath. Because the greatest question remained: what would humanity do now? The silence after the storm. The battle for Exervon had ended in a single night. Human warships hovered in the skies, their black hulls reflecting the city lights below. Troops patrolled the streets, not as conquerors, but as guardians, ensuring that chaos did not take what war had left behind. The Supreme Chancellor had been taken into custody. The Union's surviving leaders had surrendered without a word. There was no celebration, no grand speeches, only silence, because the war was over. And now, the real work began. The galaxy watches. From the deepest colonies to the oldest civilizations, every species in the galaxy waited for humanity's next move. Would they take the throne? Would they rebuild the Union under their rule? Would they become the new overlords? For centuries, the Galactic Union had crushed every enemy, every challenger, every voice that dared to speak against them. Now, humanity stood at the center of it all. The galaxy expected them to do what every empire before them had done: claim power, demand submission, rule with an iron fist. Instead, they did something no one expected. The words that changed history. The human commander stood before the United Galactic Assembly, a gathering of species that had once trembled beneath the Union's rule. Now, they sat in silent anticipation, waiting for the words that would decide their future. He stepped forward. No crown, no royal garments, no demands. Just the same steady voice that had shattered an empire. "We did not come to replace your masters," he said. The chamber held its breath. "We did not come to rule you." A murmur swept through the crowd. Confusion, disbelief, hope. "The Union is gone," the human continued. "Its rule is over. And what happens next will not be decided by us." He looked over the assembly, at species who had lived in fear for generations, at worlds that had never known true freedom. "This galaxy is yours now," he said. "Decide its future wisely. A future without chains." The Galactic Union's laws were dismantled. The oppressive systems that had controlled entire species were erased. Worlds that had known only subjugation were given a voice. Real choice for the first time in history. Some called it madness, a species as powerful as humanity refusing to take control. But others saw it for what it truly was, an act of defiance against the cycle of tyranny. Because humanity had not fought this war for power. They had fought it for freedom, not just for themselves, but for everyone. Legends are written in blood and fire. The old stories had called humanity weak, a myth, a joke. But the galaxy would never make that mistake again. Because now, they understood the truth. Humanity was not the conqueror. They were the storm that shattered chains. They were the fire that burned away corruption. And when history recorded the fall of the Galactic Union, it would not speak of an empire taking its place. It would speak of a species that changed the galaxy forever. The age of oppression was over. The age of humanity had begun, and the stars would never be the same again.